The district manager, a man named Henderson, called me out in front of the entire sales team, citing substandard performance. He held up my latest sales report, circled in red. "You are a liability, Miller," he drawled, tossing the paper onto the table where it slid past my reach. "Your ambition has finally outrun your ability." The headlights of Frank Miller's silver sedan cut through the late-night stillness, painting the familiar driveway in stark relief. He had driven 300 miles since noon, the miles blurring into a dull ache behind his eyes and across his shoulders. It was a surprise visit meant to catch Sarah before she left for her sister's place in the morning. He usually called, gave fair warning, but tonight the need for home had been stronger than protocol. As he pulled to a stop beside the old oak, a sleek black Mercedes-Benz sat angled oddly near the garage door. It looked out of place, too expensive for the quiet street, too new for their modest neighborhood. A knot tightened low in Frank Miller's gut. He knew that car. He had seen it on commercials, in the local paper. "Dale is here," he whispered to the empty cab, the name a cold stone in his mouth. He killed the engine. The sudden silence pressed in. The house stood mostly dark, a single soft glow emanating from the upstairs bedroom window. He left his duffel bag on the passenger seat, the quiet unnerving him more than any noise could have. The gravel crunched under his work boots as he walked toward the back door. He let himself in, the familiar click of the lock doing little to comfort him. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the scent of Sarah's lavender candles, a smell that now felt alien, clinging to something it should not touch. Frank slipped off his shoes, placing them carefully by the coat rack, a habit of years that felt suddenly ridiculous. He moved through the living room, the furniture shadows stretching long and the faint light filtering from the street. The stairs creaked softly under his weight, each step measured, deliberate. Reaching the landing, the sound reached him, muffled but unmistakable. It was Sarah's laughter, soft and lilting, a sound he loved, yet now it carried a joyful abandon that felt too bright, too free for the late hour. A man's voice followed, deep and confident, a low rumble that settled Frank Miller's stomach like a lead weight. His heart started to work harder, a slow, heavy thud against his ribs. Frank moved closer to the bedroom door, his hand instinctively reaching for the cool brass knob, then stopping short. He pressed his ear to the solid wood. "Shh, you will wake him," Sarah whispered, her voice playful, a note of mock concern. "Let him," the man chuckled, his tone easy, arrogant. Maybe he would learn a thing or two. The words hung in the air, sharp and clear. Inside, shadows shifted, large forms dancing against the thin crack under the door, undeniable. A cold wave washed over Frank Miller, not of anger, not yet, but of a profound, sickening certainty. His hand trembled as he slowly pulled his phone from his jeans pocket. He opened the camera application, his thumb hovering over the record button. The small, glowing screen reflected a face he barely recognized, etched with a mask of shock and a cold, rising resolve. He pressed record, holding the phone steady against the door, capturing the faint sounds, the disembodied laughter, the taunting words in the silent, shifting shadows. Each pixel, each sound wave, was a precise, undeniable piece of evidence. Frank Miller retreated, his movements mechanical, silent. His mind, usually slow to anger, was now racing, cold and clear. He found Sarah's spare garage key on the small hook by the back door, a key she rarely used. He walked back out into the cool night air, toward the sleek black Mercedes. The chrome glinted under the distant streetlight. He opened the driver's side door. The interior smelled expensive, a heavy, musky cologne that assaulted his senses, making his stomach clench. It was a smell he had encountered before on a few occasions at local business events, a smell that now felt like an unwelcome invasion. In the center console, nestled amongst a scattering of loose change and a few business cards, he found a wallet. It was thick, expensive leather. He opened it, his fingers surprisingly steady. The driver's license stared back at him. Dale Peterson, it read. The photo, a smiling, confident man, older than Frank, but well-preserved, hair neatly combed back. The address was local, a few miles away. The occupation listed was luxury car dealer. The pieces clicked into place, cold and hard, leaving no room for doubt, no space for the desperate hope he had unknowingly clung to. He carefully removed the driver's license and a few $100 bills from the wallet, slipping them into his own pocket. He closed the wallet, replaced it in the console, then locked the Mercedes. The soft thud of the door closing echoed in the stillness. He returned to his own silver sedan, his movements precise, methodical. He slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway without a backward glance at the house that no longer felt like home. On the highway, the city lights blurred into long streaks of color. He drove with no destination in mind, the highway stretching endlessly ahead. The only thing guiding him was a burning need to understand the full scope of what had happened and to plan his next steps. "They will pay," he muttered, his voice hoarse, raw, an unfamiliar sound in the quiet of the car. The words felt less like a threat and more like a simple statement of fact. Hours later, the sun beginning to hint at dawn on the horizon, Frank Miller checked into a nameless motel off an interstate exit. The room was bland, impersonal, a stark contrast to the shattered landscape of his world. He locked the door, drew the cheap curtains, and sat on the edge of the stiff bed. He pulled out his phone again, his heart a lump of ice in his chest, and watched the recording he had made, the faint sounds and dancing shadows playing out his humiliation on the small screen. Frank Miller did not go home. Days turned into a week, then more, spent in the anonymous motel room. Sarah called often, her voice laced with worry, leaving texts that piled up on his phone. He kept his replies brief, distant, each word carefully chosen to convey a sense of urgency about his supposed work. "Unexpected project," he would tell her, his voice flat, "out of town, long hours." He offered no details, knowing she would not press too hard. She was accustomed to his sporadic travel for Miller Enterprises, though rarely for this long. The lie was a bitter taste in his mouth, but it felt necessary, a shield for the cold, methodical work he had begun. From the bland confines of the motel, Frank delved into Dale Peterson's life. The internet provided a surprising wealth of information. Dale was the owner of Peterson Luxury Motors, a well-established dealership on the outskirts of the city. He had a reputation for aggressive sales, for being a shark in the local business community, but always with a polished smile. Frank found photos, Dale at charity events, Dale with local politicians, Dale standing beside gleaming cars. He found his home address, a large house in an affluent suburb. Public records confirmed he was married to a woman named Cynthia, and they had 2 college-age children. A seemingly perfect facade, Frank noted, the kind that might crack under pressure. Frank started observing Sarah from afar. He parked his silver sedan a few blocks from their home, usually before dawn, and waited. He watched her go through her morning routine, the familiar sight of her pulling out of the driveway, the girls, Emily and Lily, strapped into the back seat, their laughter faint even from his distance. He followed her to school, watched her drop them off, a pang of something he couldn't name twisting in his gut. He saw her meet Dale Peterson for coffee a few times at a small cafe downtown, a place she rarely frequented with Frank. They sat in a back booth, heads close. Their glances were furtive at first, then easier, their smiles open, intimate. He watched Dale lightly touch her arm, a gesture that spoke volumes. Each sighting was a precise, painful calibration of his resolve. He continued to build his case meticulously. More videos, taken with his phone, captured their meetings, their casual touches, their shared laughter. Photos, zoomed in and slightly grainy, served as a visual corroboration. He kept a digital log, timestamping each piece of evidence, categorizing it, creating a timeline of their affair. Each file added to the cold, hard weight of betrayal, stripping away any last shred of doubt, hardening his resolve to something akin to steel. He did not feel anger anymore. Not exactly. It was a cold, calculating determination. Then he started looking into Miller Enterprises' finances and Sarah's art gallery business, the Artisan Nook. He had always trusted her with the bookkeeping for the gallery, a small passion project of hers that had found moderate success. He scrutinized bank statements, sales records, looking for any connections, any discrepancies. Had money been siphoned off? Were there unusual expenses? Transactions that didn't quite add up? He cross-referenced dates with his timeline of their affair, searching for a financial web, a deeper layer to the deception. The numbers stared back, mostly clean, but a few minor anomalies caught his eye, small purchases that seemed out of place for gallery supplies or personal use. Nothing conclusive yet. He called his old college roommate at Ken, now a family lawyer in Columbus. "Ken, it's Frank Miller," he began, his voice flat, conversational. "Got a hypothetical for you. A friend of mine. He's in a tough spot. Wife might be seeing someone else. What's the score with separation? Asset division? Kids involved?" Ken, ever the pragmatist, offered straightforward, legalistic advice, never questioning the friend angle. Frank listened, taking notes, asking precise questions about jurisdiction, about evidence, about the cost of a protracted fight. Ken asked, "Your friend's still young? Sounds like he needs a reliable man if things go south." Frank just hummed in response. The weight of his own deception, the quiet lies he told Sarah, settled heavily on Frank Miller's shoulders. He felt like he was living two separate lives, the concerned, hardworking husband on the phone and the cold, meticulous investigator in the motel. It was a bitter taste in his mouth, a flavor of dishonesty he had never expected to know. But it was necessary, he told himself. It was a means to an end. It was the only way to get to the truth, to protect what little he had left. He intensified his focus on Dale Peterson, specifically on his business. Online forums, local consumer protection sites, even old newspaper articles revealed a pattern. Peterson Luxury Motors had a history of slightly shady deals, complaints about pushed warranties, inflated service hours, and customers feeling pressured. Frank saw an opportunity there, a potential vulnerability beyond the personal. Dale's professional reputation was his fortress, built on his polished image. That fortress, Frank decided, would be key. He began to craft a plan not just to expose the affair, but to do so in a way that would twist the knife. He wanted to hurt both Sarah and Dale, not merely emotionally, but professionally, socially. A public humiliation, a dismantling of their carefully constructed lives. It would be precise, surgical. The details were still forming, but the core idea was clear. Expose their deceit in a manner that would resonate through their community, through their businesses, through everything they valued. He scrolled through photos on his phone, pausing on one of Emily and Lily, their bright, innocent faces smiling back at him from a school picture. Emily, with her missing front tooth. Lily, her eyes wide and trusting. They were oblivious to the storm gathering around them. "This is for them," he told himself, his voice a whisper in the silent motel room. To protect them from the fallout, from the laws, from the kind of people who could do this. He had to be strong, to be the one who stood firm. Frank Miller returned home after nearly 2 weeks. The silver sedan pulled into the driveway, the black Mercedes notably absent this time. Sarah met him at the door, her face a mix of relief and something else, something he couldn't quite decipher. She hugged him, a little too tightly, a little too long. "Missed you," she said, her voice soft but a touch too eager, almost as if she were trying to convince herself. He returned the embrace, his arms feeling stiff, his expression carefully neutral. He could feel her trying to bridge the gap, but the distance between them felt like a canyon. He settled back into the routine, but with a new layer of scrutiny. He watched Sarah's every move, her phone habits, the way she sometimes glanced at it, then quickly put it down when he entered the room. Her excuses for leaving the house were always plausible, always vague. Running errands, meeting a friend for lunch, picking up supplies for the gallery. He never accused her, never questioned. He just watched. He listened, and he filed away each small detail. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage where a slow, silent play was unfolding. One evening, over a dinner that felt oddly strained, Frank subtly began to sow seeds of doubt about Dale. "Saw an interesting piece online today," he began, buttering a roll, "about that dealership, Henderson Motors, downstate. Heard they were caught pushing unnecessary warranties. Shady stuff. Makes you wonder about these big luxury places, doesn't it?" He kept his tone light, conversational, looking past Sarah as if simply musing. Sarah paused, her fork halfway to her plate. "Really?" she asked, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Henderson Motors. I know Dale mentioned them once." Frank just nodded, taking a sip of water. The seed was planted. Later that night, from his hidden laptop in the motel room he still maintained, Frank crafted an anonymous email. It was precise, just vague enough to seem like an insider tip, specific enough to warrant investigation. He used a burner email account, routing it through multiple servers. The recipient was a local consumer affairs reporter, a woman known for her tenacious reporting. The email hinted at questionable sales practices and aggressive warranty pushing at Peterson Luxury Motors, providing a few fabricated dates and vague details that would require further digging. He sent it into the digital ether, a quiet shot across the bow. A few days passed. Then, tucked away on page 3 of the local newspaper, under a small headline, a blurb appeared. Allegations of questionable sales practices emerge at local luxury dealership. No names were mentioned, but the description was clear enough. Frank saw Dale Peterson at the grocery store that afternoon, his face etched with a faint concern, a restless energy in his movements. Sarah, too, mentioned it over dinner. "Did you see that article about the car dealership?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "Dale seemed a little flustered today when I spoke to him. Said it was probably just a competitor trying to stir trouble." Frank merely grunted, feigning disinterest. The hook had been set. Frank, leveraging his expertise from Miller Enterprises, began to subtly shift funds within the company's accounts. He moved larger sums into less liquid investments, citing optimizing cash flow and strategic reallocations. He added layers of authorization ostensibly to streamline processes, making it harder for Sarah to access significant amounts from joint business accounts without his explicit signature or, at the very least, a clear, detailed justification. He created an illusion of financial caution, a tightening of the purse strings that would soon impact her gallery. It was a silent, bloodless coup. The children, as they often did, picked up on the unspoken tension. Emily, 7, came to him one morning, her brow furrowed. "Dad," she asked, her voice small, "is Mom mad at you? Or are you mad at Mom?" Frank knelt, placing a hand on her shoulder. "No, sweet pea," he said, forcing a smile. "Just a lot on my mind with work. Big projects." Sarah overheard. Her eyes flickered with a brief, unreadable worry before she dismissed it. "He's just stressed, honey," she told Emily, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. He then initiated a calculated delay. An important shipment of new artwork for Sarah's gallery was awaiting his signature for the wire transfer. He held it up, citing due diligence on the supplier, unexpected cash flow issues from his own business, and a need to review all expenditures carefully. He made it sound like sound business practice, a necessary caution in uncertain times. Sarah tried to argue, her frustration evident. "Frank, this is important," she said. "I need those pieces for the spring exhibition." He remained firm, unyielding. "I understand, Sarah, but we need to be smart with our money. It's just a delay, not a cancellation." The impact on her work was immediate, her carefully planned exhibition now in jeopardy. Meanwhile, the local reporter, finding enough smoke, began digging deeper into Dale Peterson's dealership. Unseen to Frank, calls were made, former employees contacted, disgruntled customers interviewed. Dale, Frank knew, would be feeling the pressure. He would be spending more time on damage control, trying to shore up his public image. The web was tightening, unbeknownst to Dale, spun thread by silent thread by Frank Miller. Frank felt no satisfaction, no rush of vindication, only a quiet, grim determination. He watched the news reports, read the small blurbs in the paper, monitored the subtle shifts in Sarah's demeanor. The first domino had fallen, just as he had planned. The rest he knew would follow. Sarah's gallery business, the Artisan Nook, began to experience tangible setbacks. The delayed art shipment from Frank's due diligence had pushed back her spring exhibition, costing her potential sales and damaging her reputation with a few key collectors. Several online marketing campaigns she had planned were suddenly too expensive, her access to joint funds proving surprisingly difficult. "It is just business, Sarah," Frank would say, his voice bland, almost weary when she voiced her frustrations. "Times are tight. We have to be smart about cash flow. Miller Enterprises needs its capital liquid right now." She was annoyed, even angry, but she could not pinpoint the exact cause of these new, persistent obstacles. It felt like walking through treacle, every step harder than it should be. The local news followed up on their initial blurb. A more substantial piece ran, detailing specific customer complaints against Peterson. Luxury motors, aggressive sales tactics, inflated warranty prices, a history of poor post-sale service. The article cited anonymous sources, but the details were damning. Frank's online tracking showed a noticeable dip in Dale's sales figures almost immediately. The glossy veneer of Dale's dealership, once unblemished, now had a growing crack. Frank, always a careful planner, found himself at a community fundraiser, a silent auction for the local library. He saw Martha Peterson, Dale's wife, by the dessert table. He had met her a few times, a pleasant, unassuming woman. He walked over, offering a polite smile. "Martha, good to see you," he began, his voice sympathetic. "Rough week for Dale, I imagine, with that news story." Martha sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It's been a lot, Frank," she admitted. "He is so stressed. Always late nights at the dealership now, trying to smooth things over." Frank nodded, his gaze steady. "Must be hard on you, all those late nights," he mused, letting the words hang in the air, allowing her to draw her own conclusions. He offered a sympathetic ear, subtly feeding her rumors about Dale's late nights and stress from work, cloaked in concern. He excused himself soon after, leaving Martha with a seed of unease. Dale, under the mounting pressure from the bad press and the subtle unrest among his business partners, became increasingly stressed and distracted. His clandestine meetings with Sarah grew less frequent, more rushed. He was often late, preoccupied, his phone buzzing constantly with calls he would take in hushed tones. Sarah noticed his withdrawal, the subtle shift in his affection, the way his mind seemed to be elsewhere, even when they were together. He was a man fighting fires, and she was no longer his sole focus. He was pulling away, and she could feel it. Frank made a point of spending more time with Emily and Lily. He bought Emily a new advanced science kit, a complex model rocket that required patient assembly. He spent evenings with her at the kitchen table, guiding her small hands, talking through the physics, deepening their bond. He read to Lily before bed, long chapters from her favorite adventure books, his voice steady and calm. He was present, attentive, almost solicitous. This quiet dedication further isolated Sarah, who felt herself drifting, her own worries about her gallery and Dale's distant behavior consuming her. Gossip, a persistent undercurrent in their small Midwestern community, began to hum. Stories about Dale Peterson's business troubles, embellished and distorted, spread from the grocery store aisles to the school pickup line. Sarah started to overhear snide remarks, veiled comments about Peterson luxury motors, about Dale's character. A few friends, usually quick to offer advice or a sympathetic ear, seemed to hold back, their eyes a little too knowing. She felt a subtle chill, a shift in the community's perception that she could not quite grasp, but which felt directed somehow at her. Frank then sent another anonymous missive, this time a carefully worded letter, printed and mailed from a different town to Dale's business partners. It was phrased as concern from a longtime associate, questioning Dale's recent judgment, his apparent distraction, and the financial implications of the negative publicity. It was subtle, designed to sow distrust without directly accusing him of anything specific, just enough to make them look closer at Dale's books, at his commitments. Sarah, feeling the increasing pressure from her failing business ventures, the strained atmosphere at home, and Dale's sudden coolness, began to connect the dots. Frank's sudden, extended absence, his new, tight-fisted control over their joint finances, the string of bad luck plaguing Dale's business. A cold suspicion, sharp and unwelcome, began to form in her mind. It was a terrifying pattern, a design too deliberate to be mere coincidence. Frank looked at himself in the bathroom mirror one evening, the fluorescent light harsh on his face. He saw the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw. He recognized the quiet rage that had consumed him, had reshaped him. He was a different man now, colder, sharper, stripped of the easygoing nature he once possessed. The man in the mirror was driven by a single, unyielding purpose. He was becoming the architect of ruin, and there was no turning back. Later that night, as Sarah tidied up the living room, picking up Frank's discarded work jacket, something slipped from an inner pocket. It was a small, creased paper, an old receipt from Dale's wallet, the very one Frank had taken on that first night. Her heart lurched, a sickening jump in her chest. The faded ink, the familiar logo of Peterson Luxury Motors, the date. The puzzle pieces, once scattered and confusing, suddenly clicked into place, menacingly. The full, brutal truth descended upon her, cold and clear. Sarah confronted Frank, holding the crumpled receipt from Dale Peterson's wallet in her hand. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the paper. "What is going on, Frank?" she asked, her eyes searching his, avoiding the true heart of her suspicion. "You are not yourself. And the gallery, our finances, everything is so strained." She wanted him to explain, to give her something, anything that would dismantle the cold certainty growing in her heart. Frank met her gaze with a calm, almost placid expression. He took the receipt from her hand, glanced at it, and shrugged. "That old thing?" he said, a dismissive tone. "Must have picked it up somewhere. Probably fell out of a car I was test driving. As for everything else, I have been under immense pressure at Miller Enterprises. And honestly, Sarah, your gallery has not exactly been a cash cow. Poor financial planning on your end, I would say. We need to be more disciplined." He made her feel inadequate, her efforts dismissed, her concerns trivialized. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the living room, the sting of his words sharper than any direct accusation. Across town, Dale Peterson was facing a firing squad. His business partners, a group of older conservative investors, had called an urgent meeting. The local news reports, coupled with the anonymous letter Frank had sent, had spooked them. They laid out the dipping sales figures, the growing complaints, the tarnished reputation. "Dale, we have serious concerns about your leadership," one partner stated, his voice tight. "Your focus seems to be elsewhere. We need you fully engaged, not distracted." The threat of a forced buyout, or worse, loomed heavy in the room. At home, Martha Peterson discovered strange charges on their shared credit card statement. Expensive dinners at places Dale never mentioned, always on nights he claimed to be working late at the dealership. Frank's subtle hints, dropped weeks ago at the fundraiser, echoed in her mind, taking on a new, chilling clarity. The carefully constructed image of her husband began to fray around the edges. The tension in their home was palpable, a heavy silence that even the children noticed. Emily, usually so boisterous, came to Sarah one evening, her smaller hand gripping her mother's skirt. "Mommy," she whispered, "why are you and Dad always quiet now?" Lily, sitting on the floor, stopped playing with her dolls, her eyes wide, sensing the unease. Sarah knelt, forcing a weak smile. "Just grown-up worries, sweethearts," she said, pulling them into a tight hug, feeling the fragile shell of her life begin to crack. Desperate for solace, for some explanation, Sarah sought out Dale. She found him at the cafe, his face haggard, a half-empty cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. She tried to tell him about Frank, about the receipt, about her growing suspicions. But Dale was too consumed by his own problems. "My business is crumbling, Sarah," he said, rubbing his temples. "This press is killing me. My partners are talking about forcing me out. We need to be careful, very careful." His words were a cold shower, a stark realization that he was not her refuge, but a man drowning in his own carefully crafted hell. The moment had arrived. Frank, using a new untraceable email address, sent the recording from that first night. The muffled laughter, Sarah's whispered shh, Dale's arrogant chuckle, the shifting shadows. He included the other compiled evidence, the photos, the time-stamped logs of their meetings, the credit card receipts. He sent it to Dale's business partners, ensuring it reached every single one. And anonymously, he sent it to Martha Peterson. The email was terse, without commentary. The evidence spoke for itself. The video, carefully edited to crop out any discernible features that might identify the children, began circulating. At first, it was a small, influential circle within their community. The partners, their spouses, their close associates. Then, like a ripple, it widened. The whispers turned into outright conversations, the gossip into undeniable fact. The cold realism of the betrayal was laid bare for all to see. If you're finding yourself drawn into this quiet devastation, stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Sarah's gallery, already financially unstable from Frank's subtle manipulations, now took a direct hit. Clients, hearing the whispers, the full, ugly truth of the affair, withdrew their business. An influential patron whose continued support was vital canceled her commission, citing unforeseen circumstances and a need to align with more reputable establishments. Sarah watched her dream, her passion, unravel before her eyes, piece by agonizing piece. Frank watched the unraveling from a distance, the quiet chaos he had meticulously orchestrated. There was a grim satisfaction, yes, in seeing his plan unfold, but it was mingled with a profound emptiness, a hollow ache in his chest. This he knew was the price of their choices and the price of his own. Dale Peterson's world began to crumble in earnest. His business partners, confronted with the video evidence and the escalating financial woes of Peterson Luxury Motors, pulled out. The dealership, once a beacon of luxury, faced imminent bankruptcy. At home, Martha confronted him, the screen of her phone mirroring the damning footage. Her face was a mask of furious grief, her voice tight with disbelief. "How could you, Dale?" she choked out, holding the phone steady, the images of his betrayal undeniable. He had no answer, only a defeated slump to his shoulders. Sarah found the video herself, not from Frank, but forwarded to her by a concerned friend from her gallery, an email that arrived with a terse, pitying subject line. She watched it, her hands trembling. The muffled laughter, the whispers, the shifting shadows. The fragmented puzzle pieces from Frank's distance. The receipt, Dale's evasiveness, now clicked into place with brutal clarity. Her world tilted, the floor beneath her feet feeling suddenly unstable. She confronted Frank that evening. "You knew," she cried, her voice raw, echoing in the quiet house. "You planned this. All of it." Her accusation was a desperate plea for denial, for him to be anything but the architect of her ruin. Frank's face was stone, devoid of emotion, his eyes cold and unwavering. "You broke our family, Sarah," he replied, his voice flat, almost clinical. "I just ensured you paid the price." The words hung in the air, final and unyielding. The children were unwitting casualties. Emily, usually tucked away in her room, heard snippets of their parents' explosive fight. Words like affair and Dale pierced through the thin walls. She understood enough. She retreated further into herself, devastated, a quiet storm brewing behind her usually bright eyes. Lily, too young to grasp the specifics, was confused and scared, clinging to her dolls, sensing the deep fissures tearing through her home. The affair became public knowledge, a topic of whispered conversations and pointed glances in their small Midwestern town. Sarah faced ostracism, a quiet, pervasive judgment from former friends and neighbors. Conversations would halt when she entered a room, smiles would vanish, and invitations stopped arriving. She was the woman who had brought shame, an object of pity and scorn, her reputation shattered by the undeniable evidence circulating through the community. The legal proceedings began swiftly. Martha Peterson filed for divorce from Dale, citing infidelity and emotional distress, initiating a messy battle for assets and reputation. Frank, not to be outdone, initiated his own divorce proceedings against Sarah. His lawyer, Ken, drafted a detailed petition seeking full custody of Emily and Lily, citing Sarah's parental unfitness due to her adulterous behavior and substantial financial reparations for the emotional and material damages incurred. The courtroom was now another battleground. Dale Peterson's professional life was in ruins. His dealership was in receivership, his assets frozen. He was unemployable in the tight-knit world of local business, his name synonymous with scandal and failure. The once confident swagger he carried, the easy charm he used to wield, was gone, replaced by a defeated slump to his shoulders, a haunted look in his eyes. He was a pariah, stripped of everything he had built. Sarah found herself utterly alone. Her art gallery, the Artisan Nook, already struggling, was forced to close its doors, a final public symbol of her downfall. Her few remaining friends, unable to reconcile her actions with the woman they thought they knew, or perhaps unwilling to be associated with the scandal, had abandoned her. And her children, sensing the irreparable damage, grew distant, their once open affection replaced by a quiet reserve, a silent judgment. Frank had won. His plan, executed with cold precision, had achieved its objectives. But the victory felt hollow, tinged with a profound sadness that settled deep in his bones. His family was shattered, yes, but in achieving that, he had also shattered himself. His own heart was scarred, hardened by the bitterness of betrayal and the cold, calculated effort of revenge. He was alone too, in a different way. He grappled with his own actions in the quiet hours of the night. Was this meticulous, brutal revenge justified? Had it truly brought him justice? Or merely a darker form of emptiness? Or had it, in its cold efficiency, made him as cruel as those who had betrayed him, forever altering the man he once was? The weight of this morality, heavy and unresolved, pressed down on him. The divorce proceedings were brutal, stripped of any pretense of civility. The custody battle for Emily and Lily became the central, most agonizing front. Frank, guided by Ken, meticulously presented the affair. The public humiliation, Sarah's perceived neglect of the children during her distraction, as evidence of her moral failings. His lawyer painted a picture of a devoted father protecting his innocent daughters from a mother whose judgment was severely compromised. Emily, now 9, and acutely aware of the unraveling of her world, struggled with divided loyalties. She was deeply wounded by both parents, by the harsh words she overheard, by the palpable tension that had replaced laughter. She loved her mother, but she saw the pain in her father's eyes. Lily, just 5, too young to fully grasp the complexities, felt the emotional turmoil like a thick, suffocating cloud. She often retreated, silent and watchful, her small face mirroring the distress around her. Sarah, stripped bare of her career, her friends, and her public reputation, fought desperately for her children. She tried to explain her mistakes, her loneliness, her momentary lapse in judgment. She spoke of her love for them, her need to be their mother. But her words, delivered from a place of desperation and remorse, rang hollow in the cold, legalistic air of the courtroom. The evidence Frank had amassed, the testimony of a few carefully chosen witnesses, drowned out her pleas. Dale Peterson's spiral had continued unchecked. He lost his home, his family fragmented by divorce and resentment. The dealership, stripped of its assets, was a skeleton of its former self, eventually closing its doors. He descended into alcoholism, a ghost of his former confident self, his once sharp mind dulled by drink and regret. Frank would occasionally see him from a distance, a man with a haunted look in his eyes, a stark warning of what total ruin looked like. Frank presented an unwavering, calm, and collected front in court. He was the wronged man, the stoic husband and father, seeking only justice and protection for his innocent children. His testimony was factual, devoid of overt emotion, yet it conveyed a profound sense of injury and paternal duty. His performance was convincing, eliciting nods of agreement from the judge and quiet sympathy from the gallery. He spoke of the girls' needs, their stability, the careful home he could provide. The judge, after weeks of testimony and deliberation, delivered his decision. Frank was granted primary custody of Emily and Lily. Sarah would be allowed supervised visitation, restricted to specific days and times, and only under the watchful eye of a court-appointed monitor. The judge cited the severe emotional impact of the affair on the children, the instability it introduced into their lives, and the evidence of Sarah's impaired judgment. Sarah reached her breaking point in the courtroom. As the words were uttered, as the gavel fell, she broke down, a deep, guttural sob escaping her. She saw her children being taken away, not physically, but legally, structurally. The full, crushing weight of her choices, their devastating consequences, crashed down on her, leaving her a weeping wreck. Frank watched, his face impassive, a strange mix of grim satisfaction and profound emptiness churning within him. Emily, observing the aftermath, the tears, the rigid legal framework, began to develop a quiet resentment toward Frank. She saw his cold, calculated destruction, even as she understood her mother's betrayal. The family was fractured in new ways, not just between husband and wife, but between children and parents, a complex web of loyalties and unspoken accusations. The girls were with Frank, but the family unit was shattered beyond repair. Frank ensured Sarah received a minimal financial settlement. His lawyers meticulously detailed her reckless spending at the gallery, the financial damage her actions had inflicted on Miller Enterprises through the diverted funds, and the costs associated with the legal battle. The court agreed, leaving Sarah with little more than her personal belongings and a mountain of legal debt. It was another layer of his retribution, precise and unforgiving. Frank stood victorious in his quiet house. The girls were there, moving through the rooms with a new, somber silence. He cooked dinner, helped with homework, tucked them into bed. He had achieved his goal, but the house was quiet, too quiet. The warmth that once permeated the walls, the spontaneous laughter, the easy intimacy, was gone. He had won, but what had he truly gained? The silence of victory was a heavy, persistent weight. Frank tried to rebuild a life for Emily and Lily within the quiet walls of their house. He maintained routines, cooked healthy meals, helped with homework, and drove them to their activities. But the household was haunted by the past, by the ghost of what they once were. Laughter was measured, joy was hard to find, replaced by a pervasive sense of caution and a quiet tension. He was a father, present and responsible, but the warmth, the spontaneity, the easy affection had been meticulously stripped away. Sarah tried to establish a new normal too, or at least a bridge to her daughters. Her supervised visits were strained, awkward affairs in sterile rooms. She attempted to apologize, to explain her mistakes, her loneliness, her longing for something she thought she had lost. But her words were often met with silence from Emily or confused glances from Lily. The monitor, a neutral observer, simply watched. The distance felt insurmountable, a wall built from betrayal and legal decrees. Dale Peterson simply disappeared. One day his house was for sale, then sold. He left town, his life in ruins, becoming another cautionary tale in the community, whispered about in hushed tones, a stark example of a man who lost everything. Frank occasionally heard rumors of him moving out west, of struggling with odd jobs, but the details were vague, indistinct, like a dream fading into memory. Frank struggled with the emptiness that often settled upon him in the quiet hours after the girls were asleep. He had achieved his revenge, yes. He had exacted a price, a heavy one, but at what cost to his own soul? He felt isolated, even from his daughters, who, though under his care, kept a part of themselves guarded. He was the victor, but the victory tasted like ash. Emily, now blossoming into a teenager, became fiercely independent. She was smart, resilient, but deeply distrustful of deep emotional ties. The parental betrayal, the public spectacle, had shaped her, hardening her against vulnerability. She excelled in school, poured herself into extracurriculars, but kept people at an arm's length, a protective shell around her heart. She was her father's daughter in her resolve, but her own person in her cautious distance. Years passed. Lily, no longer a small child, began to ask difficult questions. "Dad," she would ask, her brow furrowed, "why is Mom not around more? Why do we only see her with that lady watching?" Her innocent questions forced Frank to confront uncomfortable truths, to navigate the carefully constructed narrative he had built for them. He would offer vague explanations about grown-up problems and hard choices, but he knew the full weight of the truth would eventually fall upon them. Frank often sat on his porch in the evenings, watching the Midwestern sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. He considered the possibility of forgiveness, not for Sarah or Dale, but for himself, for the consuming anger that had driven him, for the cold, methodical destruction he had wrought. It was a heavy thought, a mountain he knew he might never fully climb. Could he forgive the man he had become? Could he shed the skin of his revenge? One day, on a business trip to a town a few hours away, Frank saw Sarah. She was working a modest job at a small cafe, her hair pulled back, her face a little older, a little wearier. Their eyes did not meet. There was no recognition, no interaction, just a fleeting sense of sorrow that passed over him, a cold ache in his chest. He turned away, leaving her to her new, quiet life. The legacy of the betrayal continued to shape the Miller family's future. The girls carried their own scars, their own questions. The house remained a home, but it was a home with a permanent, indelible scar, a missing piece that could never be replaced. The ripple effects of that one night, that one decision, stretched out, touching every corner of their lives. Frank sat alone on his porch, the last light of day fading into twilight. The air was cool, carrying the scent of cut grass. He thought of all that had transpired, all that had been gained, and all that had been lost. He wondered if any of it, the calculated revenge, the quiet desolation, was truly worth the price? The answer remained elusive, caught somewhere between the quiet hum of the cicadas and the long, deep shadows stretching across his yard. Years passed, blurring into the predictable rhythm of Midwestern life. Emily was off to college now, a young woman with a sharp mind and a quiet intensity. Lily, a high school freshman, navigated the hallways with a blend of curiosity and reserved observation. The immediate pain of the divorce, the scandal, Dale's downfall, had dulled with time, a scab forming over the wound. But the echoes remained, a phantom ache beneath the surface. One autumn evening, Emily came home from her first semester. Her mind broadened, her perspective sharpened. She sat with Frank in the living room, the low lamp casting long shadows. "You hurt Mom, Dad," she said, her voice steady, devoid of anger but firm. "Even if she was wrong, you hurt her. You didn't just walk away, you made sure she lost everything." Frank listened, his gaze fixed on the fireplace, silent. Her words were a mirror, reflecting a truth he had refused to acknowledge. He finally spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper against the crackling fire. "You are right, Em," he said, the admission heavy. "I did. I thought it would bring me peace, seeing them pay, but it just brought a different kind of empty." The honesty hung in the air, raw and vulnerable, a rare moment of unguarded truth between them. Lily, in her quiet way, had always possessed a deep empathy. Curious, and perhaps sensing her mother's persistent sadness during their supervised visits, she secretly reached out. A cautious text message, a tentative phone call, a slow, almost imperceptible reconnection began. A tentative bridge built by her own initiative. She wanted to understand, not to judge, but to hear the other side of the story. Sarah, weary from years of rebuilding, found solace in Lily's tentative overtures. She expressed deep remorse, not for the consequences that had befallen her, but for the profound pain she had caused her children. "I messed up, sweetie," she confessed to Lily during one of their first unsupervised coffee meetings, her voice thick with emotion. "I let my own unhappiness blind me, and you and Emily paid the price." Lily listened, her hand resting on her mother's arm, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Through their own efforts, and without Frank's direct involvement, Emily and Lily began to forge a relationship with their mother. It was different, scarred by the past, but real. They saw her on their own terms, independent of the legal constraints, rebuilding a connection that had been severed for so long. It was a testament to their own resilience, their own need for a complete narrative, a full understanding of their family's fractured history. Frank, observing his daughter's cautious path toward healing, found a different kind of peace. It was not the peace he had sought in revenge, but a quiet acceptance. He could not control everyone's path, could not mend every broken piece. His daughters were finding their own way, forging their own relationships, and perhaps in doing so they were healing parts of him he thought were lost forever. He understood now that morality was not always a matter of black and white, right or wrong. The simple satisfaction of seeing someone pay the price often involved everyone, a cascade of consequences that spared no one. The lines blurred, the pain diffused, leaving behind a complex tapestry of lingering regret and quiet resilience. The Miller home, while forever changed, began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a home. The quiet was still there, a lingering sadness that was now a permanent part of its fabric. But it was less oppressive, less haunted. There was room for quiet conversation, for shared moments, for a fragile hope to take root. Frank looked out at the vast Midwestern sky from his porch, the familiar expanse stretching endlessly above him. He was a solitary figure, still carrying the weight of his choices, the memories of a life fractured and rebuilt. But perhaps, just perhaps, he felt a little lighter, understanding that some wounds, though never fully disappearing, could eventually cease to sting quite so much.